The sky over downtown Chicago was draped in its usual mid-morning haze, the streets buzzing with the rhythm of weekday traffic. Neil Parker, the 36-year-old founder of a multi-million-dollar tech company, stepped out of the revolving doors of the Four Seasons Hotel. Dressed in a crisp navy suit and Italian leather shoes, he looked every bit the successful CEO the press loved to photograph. He adjusted the cuff of his shirt while scanning the street for his private driver, who, as always, waited across the boulevard in a sleek black Cadillac. But then something made him pause. Just across the road, standing near the edge of the sidewalk, a woman was struggling to balance a phone in one hand and wrangle four identical boys with the other. The boys were active and loud, their backpacks bouncing as they nudged each other and giggled, completely unaware of the curious look Neil was giving them. His breath hitched. It couldn't be. The woman had her hair tied up in a messy bun, sunglasses covering half her face, but he recognized her posture instantly. That was Rachel. The same Rachel he had once dreamed of building a family with. The same Rachel he had walked away from 9 years ago, telling himself it was for the best, that success needed his full attention, and love was a distraction he couldn't afford. But the boys? That was the punch that hit his chest hardest. Each of them had his light brown hair, his green eyes, and that distinct dimple in their left cheek when they smiled. Neil took a step forward, then another, heart pounding louder with each pace. He stopped at the curb, watching them, unable to speak. Rachel didn't see him at first. She was too busy trying to calm the boys, glancing at her phone with frustration. The Uber she'd requested was clearly late. Neil wasn't sure if it was nerves or guilt that rooted him to the spot. She finally looked up and froze. Her mouth parted slightly, as if she'd seen a ghost. The sunglasses hid her eyes, but Neil could imagine the emotions swimming behind them. Shock, bitterness, maybe a touch of fear. "Rachel," he said, his voice low but firm, trying not to sound as stunned as he felt. She didn't reply right away. The boys stopped clowning around and turned to look at him, their young faces curious and unafraid. One of them tilted his head in a way that reminded Neil so painfully of his own childhood photos. He almost staggered. Rachel finally nodded, tense. "Neil," she said flatly, "didn't expect to see you here. I was just coming out of a meeting. What are you doing here? Are you visiting?" His words stumbled over each other. "We live here," she said curtly, pulling the strap of her purse higher on her shoulder. "You? Still between Chicago and New York. Business." He glanced at the boys again, who were now whispering to each other, clearly intrigued. "Are these my sons?" she said, cutting him off before he could finish the question. He nodded slowly, but something in his chest was beginning to burn. They look just like me." Rachel gave a humorless laugh. "Yeah, I've noticed." There was a long, awkward silence. The Uber still hadn't arrived, and Neil wasn't sure whether he should speak or leave. The urge to ask every question bubbling in his mind was overwhelming. Were they his? Had she tried to tell him? Had he missed a life he never knew he had? But something about Rachel's stiff stance told him this was not the place to get answers. "Can I help with something? Give you a ride?" he asked, gesturing toward his car. She shook her head quickly. "We're fine." He glanced down at the boys. One of them smiled at him. "You look like my mom's friend in the photos," the kid said innocently. Rachel's lips tightened. She placed a gentle hand on the child's shoulder. "Lucas, that's not polite." Neil crouched to meet the boy's gaze. "Lucas, huh? What's your name?" he asked the others. "I'm Nolan," said the boy on the left. "He's Liam, and that's Riley." Neil smiled at all of them, his heart breaking. All four names etched themselves into his brain instantly. "You guys all go to school nearby?" "We go to Lincoln Elementary," Nolan answered proudly. Rachel's jaw clenched. She stepped in. "Neil, we have to go." He stood upright, nodding. "Of course. Sorry. It's just, I wasn't prepared for this." "Neither was I," she said quietly. Before he could say more, a silver Toyota pulled up at the curb. The Uber. Rachel opened the door and guided the boys in. She paused before getting in herself, finally taking off her sunglasses to meet his gaze fully. "They're good boys," she said. "Smart, kind, and they don't need their lives disrupted." "I would never," he began, but she shook her head. "Let's not do this now," she said softly. Goodbye, Neil. Then she was gone, the car pulling into traffic and disappearing around the corner, leaving Neil standing on the sidewalk, shaken to his core. He had spent the past decade building a tech empire, earning magazine covers, awards, private jets, and a bank balance most people only dreamed of. But in that one moment, watching the taillights fade, he realized he might have missed out on the most important thing life had to offer, the chance to be a father. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like, and share with friends. The air inside Neil's luxury condo in downtown Chicago felt heavier than usual. The panoramic windows that offered a stunning view of Lake Michigan didn't bring him the usual peace. His mind was a swirling storm of questions, guilt, and an ache he didn't understand how to contain. He hadn't been able to focus on anything since that moment on the sidewalk. Seeing Rachel after all those years had already been a surprise, but the boys, those four identical little faces that mirrored his own, had completely shattered whatever composure he had built over the years. Neil poured himself a glass of whiskey, though he rarely drank during the day. He stood in front of the window, staring out but not really seeing anything. Memories from nearly a decade ago pushed their way into his thoughts with sharp edges. 9 years ago, he was a different man, restless, obsessed with ambition, consumed by the drive to prove something to the world and maybe even to himself. Rachel had been a steady one in his life, the one who kept him grounded. She was a teacher back then, kind-hearted and smart, never dazzled by his rising fame or growing bank balance. They met when he was still struggling to get his app off the ground, long before investors and headlines. For a time, she believed in him more than he believed in himself. But somewhere along the way, when things started taking off, he stopped listening. Rachel wanted a family, a future together that didn't revolve around work, and Neil, so caught up in building his empire, thought he had time for that later. Their last conversation before the breakup echoed in his mind. Rachel had been crying. She had told him she felt like she was standing next to a ghost of the man she fell in love with. She needed him, and he didn't hear her. He was too busy negotiating with investors, flying back and forth between San Francisco and Boston, and attending startup expos. When she walked away, he let her go. He didn't chase her, didn't call, didn't even ask if she was okay. At the time, he told himself it was mutual. But now he wondered, did she try to reach out? Had she tried to tell him about the pregnancy? Could he have blocked her unknowingly? Or worse, ignored her? He pulled out his old phone from the drawer, the one he used back then. He powered it up for the first time in years. It took a while to boot, and the screen flickered like a dying light bulb. But when it finally came on, Neil scrolled through old messages and emails, trying to find something. There were unread messages from Rachel, 7, to be exact. The last one was dated 2 months after they broke up. He opened it, heart pounding. It simply said, I tried calling. I really need to talk. It's important. He checked the voicemail. There were 3 from the same period, all of them unplayed. He put one in his ear. Rachel's voice came through, shaky but calm. Neil, I know we haven't spoken, but I didn't want to keep this from you. I'm pregnant. I don't know what you'll want to do with this information, but I thought you deserved to know. I'm going to keep them. I won't ask you for anything. I just wanted to be honest. Them. She had said them. He listened to the second voicemail. Her voice was more nervous now. I guess you didn't get my last message. I've seen your company's making headlines. Congrats, I guess. I still think you should know. It's 4. I'm having quadruplets. Please call me. Neil sat down slowly on the edge of the couch, his hand trembling. 4. She had told him. She had done everything right. And he had ignored it. In his arrogance, in his tunnel vision for success, he had missed out on the most monumental event of his life. Not only had he lost the love of his life, he had unknowingly abandoned 4 children, his children. He couldn't even find the words to describe how that realization made him feel. Disgusted? Ashamed? Hollow? All of it. He picked up his phone and called the only person who might help him get to the truth faster, Sophie, his old personal assistant. She had worked for him during that time and was now running her own boutique firm in Atlanta. She picked up after 2 rings. Neil? Wow, that's a surprise. It's been years. He skipped the pleasantries. Sophie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Her tone turned serious immediately. Of course. What's going on? Back in 2015. Did Rachel ever try to contact me? Did she come to the office? Leave messages. There was a long pause on the line. She came. Twice, maybe 3 times. I remember. She was emotional. I told her you were too busy, that I'd pass along her messages. But honestly, Neil, you were a mess back then. You were screaming at people, working 18-hour days, barely sleeping. I didn't want to stress you out more. You didn't give me the messages, Neil said, voice tight. I know, I didn't. I'm sorry. She sounded genuinely remorseful. I thought I was protecting your time. I didn't know she was pregnant, I swear. Neil hung up without another word. His ears rang. There was no one else to blame now. No assistant. No calendar. No chaos. Just him. He had erased himself from their lives before they even had a chance to begin. He sat there for what felt like hours, wondering if it was too late to make things right. Were those boys growing up thinking their father had never wanted them? That he had just vanished from their lives? Would Rachel ever let him back in? Even if just as a father? There was only one way to find out. Tomorrow, he would go to Lincoln Elementary. Not as a CEO, not with lawyers or big speeches. Just as a man who had made a terrible mistake and wanted, desperately, to try and fix it. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like, and share with friends. The next morning, Neil stood across the street from Lincoln Elementary School in Evanston, watching his kids stream through the front doors, backpacks bouncing and laughter echoing in the morning air. The school building, with its red brick walls and colorful murals, looked exactly like the kind of place Rachel would have chosen. Welcoming, grounded, and unpretentious. He had barely slept, haunted by the voicemails, the missed messages, the faces of the boys. He didn't even know their names. He didn't know if they liked soccer or science, if they were allergic to peanuts or obsessed with dinosaurs. For a man who had founded a billion-dollar tech company, that ignorance hurt more than any failed deal ever could. He waited by a large oak tree, nervous that someone might recognize him. Though he kept a low profile now, there were still occasional features in Forbes or TechCrunch that used old pictures of him in a hoodie with a laptop and a smirk. He wasn't sure how he'd approach Rachel. What would he say? Hey, remember me? I ghosted you while you were carrying quadruplets. That wouldn't go well. Still, he had to try. The thought of walking away again made his stomach churn. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours until he saw her. Rachel, holding a stack of folders, her hair tied up messily, her attention focused on organizing a group of second graders who seemed overly enthusiastic about recess. She looked tired but graceful, older in the way life makes a person more complex, not less beautiful. His heart thumped louder. He took a step forward, then froze. Suddenly, 4 identical boys burst out of the school's main doors. Same height, same sandy brown hair, same blue eyes, his eyes. They raced toward her, yelling over each other. Mom, can we go to the park? Did you see my art project? I beat Owen in math today. Mom. She knelt to gather them into a quick hug before pointing them toward a waiting woman in a red Subaru. Probably a neighbor or babysitter. Neil stepped closer, suddenly desperate to speak before she disappeared again. Rachel. His voice came out quieter than he expected, but she heard it. She turned sharply, and for a second, her face didn't register him. Then her eyes widened, and she stiffened. Neil, she said, disbelief in every syllable. What are you doing here? I saw you yesterday, he said, struggling for words. Outside the coffee shop. I didn't know. Rachel, I didn't know about the boys. I swear to you. I found the old messages, the voicemails. I had no idea. She crossed her arms, her eyes guarded. That was 9 years ago, Neil. 9. You didn't think to call? Check in? I tried so many times. I know, he said, ashamed. I listened to everything last night. I found your messages. I was such a fool. I was so wrapped up in work and building the company that you vanished, she cut him off. You vanished from my life like I never mattered. Like what we had didn't matter. And now what? You show up because you saw 4 boys who look like you and suddenly want to be their dad. Her voice was sharp, but her eyes shimmered just barely. Neil took a cautious step forward. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything, really. I just want to try. I want to know them. I want to know you again. If that's even possible. Rachel looked down, exhaling slowly. They're good boys. Smart, kind, stubborn as hell. Just like you. But they've grown up without a dad, Neil. And not once did they ask for one. Because I told them you didn't want to be found. Neil's throat tightened. That's not true. I never wanted to abandon them. He stopped himself. Excuses wouldn't help here. I made a mistake. A huge one. But I'm here now. If there's any way you'd let me be a part of their lives, even in a small way, I'll earn it. I'll do whatever it takes. For a long moment, Rachel said nothing. The sound of a bell ringing echoed from the school as other parents began to arrive. You don't get to just walk in and be their father, she said softly. It doesn't work like that. This isn't some business deal you can fix with a speech and a plan. I know, he whispered. They're everything to me, she added. I built our life from scratch. No help, no child support, no visits. Just me and 4 little boys who asked a lot of hard questions. I want to answer them now, Neil said. If you'll let me. Rachel finally nodded, just once. I'll think about it. But no promises. And you don't get to meet them until I say it's time. That's more than I deserve, Neil said, relief washing over him. Thank you, Rachel. She gave him a long look, then walked away, disappearing behind the playground fence. He stayed there for a while longer, feeling a mix of hope and fear settle into his chest. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but at least now, there was a crack in the wall, a beginning. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like, and share with friends. Neil spent the next several days in a haze of reflection, checking his phone obsessively, hoping Rachel might call or text with any kind of update. She hadn't promised anything, and deep down, he knew she had every right to keep her distance. But the mere possibility of being allowed into the lives of those 4 boys had ignited something in him he hadn't felt in years. It was strange. He had sat in countless boardrooms, signed multi-million-dollar deals, and traveled across the world giving talks about innovation and leadership. Yet nothing had ever made his hands shake the way Rachel's cautious, "I'll think about it," had. He tried to return to work at his downtown Chicago office, but he couldn't focus. Spreadsheets, code updates, quarterly reports, they all felt like white noise compared to the thunderstorm in his head. So, instead of diving back into corporate matters, he found himself wandering into a local bookstore, buying books on parenting, child development, even a couple of beginner's guides to building relationships with children you've never met. By Thursday, he couldn't help himself. He sent Rachel a message, short and careful. I hope you and the boys are doing well. I understand if you need time. I'm here whenever you're ready. She didn't reply immediately, and he didn't expect her to. But late that evening, as he sat alone on the balcony of his high-rise condo, she finally responded. The boys have a soccer game Saturday morning at James Park. 9 a.m. You can come. Watch from a distance. Don't approach them. I'll talk to you after. He stared at the screen for several long seconds, reading the message over and over. It was more than he'd hoped for. Not a warm welcome, but not a closed door either. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of cool, crisp air that hinted at fall just around the corner. Neil pulled into the gravel lot at James Park 10 minutes early, dressed in jeans and a navy pullover, trying not to stand out. Families were already gathering near the soccer fields. Moms unfolding camp chairs, dads carrying coffee and soccer balls, kids zipping up jerseys with energy only 9-year-olds could muster. He scanned the area until he spotted them. Rachel stood near a red minivan, handing out water bottles and tying one boy's shoelaces. The boys wore matching blue and yellow uniforms, laughing and nudging each other in that chaotic way siblings do. Watching them from across the field, Neil felt something heavy and warm settle in his chest. They were real, not just a photo or a voicemail or a memory. They were living, breathing extensions of him. And they were beautiful. He found a quiet spot near a tree and leaned against it, trying to stay out of view but unable to take his eyes off the field. The game started, and though Neil didn't know much about youth soccer, he quickly realized the boys had inherited more than just his eyes. They were competitive, driven, and surprisingly coordinated for their age. One of them, he thought it might be the tallest, scored a goal, then turned to flash a grin that made Neil's heart twist. He clapped quietly, invisible from the cheering crowd. As the game ended and families began to pack up, he waited. Rachel approached him a few minutes later, her expression unreadable. You stayed back, she said, crossing her arms. Good. I meant what I said, Neil replied. I'll do this the way you want. I just needed to see them. Thank you for that. Rachel looked out at the field, watching the boys laugh and tackle each other in the grass. Their names are Ethan, Bryce, Mason, and Levi, she said quietly. They're in 3rd grade. They love pizza, Legos, and they think fart jokes are the peak of comedy. Neil laughed softly. Sound about right. They're smart, she continued, and kind, and sometimes exhausting. They've only known one kind of life, Neil. One version of how things are. I'm not sure how or if you fit into that. I don't want to replace anything, he said. I just want to be there in some way, even if it starts as me sitting in the back row at their games. She turned to look at him. You'll have to tell them who you are eventually, and it won't be easy. They're going to have questions. Big ones. I'll answer them. All of them. When you think they're ready. Rachel studied his face, searching for something. Maybe sincerity. Maybe regret. You disappeared once, she said. If you disappear again, it'll destroy them. So if this is just a phase of guilt, if you're going to vanish again, don't even start. I won't vanish, he said firmly. Not again. She nodded once, then turned to leave. I'll let you know about their next game. As Neil watched her walk away, something shifted in him. For the first time in nearly a decade, he felt like he was finally beginning to correct the course of his life. Not with a dramatic gesture or a tearful reunion, but with small, steady steps. He had a long road ahead, but he was on it. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like, and share with friends. The week after the soccer game passed in a blur of nervous anticipation for Neil. He couldn't stop thinking about the boys, the way they ran, the way they laughed with each other, and that split-second look one of them had given him, almost like recognition, even though they'd never met. It was surreal to think they were his sons, not just biologically, but really his, 4 whole lives that had begun without him, grown without him, and now stood just out of reach like a memory he'd never been allowed to make. Every day, he kept checking his phone, half hoping Rachel would message him with another invitation, half fearing she'd vanish again and take the boys with her. On Thursday afternoon, just as he was leaving a strategy meeting with his executive team, a text finally came through. Ethan has a school science fair tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. at Lincoln Elementary. You can come. Stand in the back. I'll let you know when it's time to say hi. Neil's heart jumped. He barely read the rest of the emails, waiting for his attention. Instead, he left the office early, went to a nearby bookstore, and bought a children's science encyclopedia, unsure if it was appropriate, but wanting to bring something. Then he drove home, ironed his only casual button-down shirt 3 times, and practiced how he might say hello to a 9-year-old he helped bring into the world but had never held. The next evening, the parking lot of Lincoln Elementary in Evanston was packed. Parents in coats carried science boards through the doors, chatting with their children and snapping pictures. Neil stood near the back of the school's multi-purpose hall, watching as the kids set up their projects on long cafeteria tables. He spotted Rachel almost immediately, standing by one of the tables with 4 identical boys swarming around her, helping one of them adjust a model volcano. Neil's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a game anymore. These weren't just maybe his kids. This was real. The boy standing proudly in front of the volcano had Neil's exact chin and the same habit of curling his lips slightly when he concentrated. That was Ethan, his son. His heart ached with the weight of it. Rachel glanced up, spotted him, and gave him a small nod. She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. Progress. Neil kept his promise. He stayed in the back, hands in his pockets, invisible to the buzzing crowd of parents and children. Ethan's project was called How Eruptions Work, and he explained it to 3 different groups with a confidence that made Neil proud. He watched how Bryce and Mason helped hand out little paper info sheets Ethan had printed, while Levi stood beside them, making sound effects and pretending to be lava. They were a team, a unit, and somehow he was connected to all of it. After about an hour, as the crowd thinned, Rachel walked toward him. Her eyes were cautious but softer than before. You can say hi now. Just Ethan. 1 minute. Keep it light. Neil nodded, suddenly unsure of everything. His feet felt heavier than usual as he approached the table. Ethan looked up, curious but not alarmed. "Hi," Neil said, kneeling slightly to be eye level. "I'm a friend of your mom's. I saw your project from back there. It's really impressive." Ethan smiled proudly. "Thanks. I like volcanoes. Did you see it erupt?" "I did," Neil said. "The baking soda and vinegar combo? Classic but effective. You explained it really well." The boy beamed. "Yeah, I made chart too. Want to see?" Neil leaned in, genuinely interested, and nodded as Ethan explained his hypothesis and how he tested it. Neil listened carefully, asking just the right amount of questions. Not too much, not too little. When her minute was up, Rachel touched his arm gently. Neil stood and smiled at Ethan. "You did a great job tonight. Keep building cool stuff, okay?" "Okay," Ethan replied, turning to show his chart to another classmate. As Neil and Rachel walked away from the crowd, she exhaled slowly. "You did well. Thank you for not pushing it. I just wanted him to know someone else out there thinks he's amazing," Neil said. "Because he is." Rachel glanced at him, her face unreadable again. "They're going camping next weekend. A family event with some of their classmates. I'll think about letting you come by on Sunday before we head back. They'll be tired. Might be a good time to introduce you to all of them." "Officially." Neil nodded, hardly trusting himself to speak. "I'd like that, more than anything." As he drove back to his condo that night, the streetlights of downtown Chicago seemed to glow brighter. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't living someone else's life. He was stepping into his own, awkwardly, late, and with more regret than he could ever count, but still stepping forward. He replayed the sound of Ethan's voice, the sparkle in his eyes when he talked about volcanoes. Neil hadn't known how much he needed that connection until he felt it. And now, he couldn't imagine letting it go. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like, and share with friends. The weekend arrived with a restless energy that Neil couldn't shake off. Sunday morning found him awake before dawn, pacing his condo like a man waiting for news from a distant battlefield. Rachel had sent him a text the night before. "We'll be back from the campgrounds around 2 p.m. If you want to stop by, keep it short. We'll be tired." He read the message a dozen times, each rereading making it more real. Today he would meet his sons. Not just one, not in a crowded school gym, not through passing glances or awkward introductions, but all 4 of them. And not as a stranger. Rachel hadn't said it outright, but Neil knew what today meant. It was a quiet offering. A test, maybe even the first step towards something bigger than he dared to hope for. He left early and drove north toward the suburban edge of Chicago, where the campgrounds bordered a stretch of protected forest land near Lake County. As he pulled up to the modest townhouse Rachel rented, he saw the boys' tent bags and coolers stacked by the garage. A minivan stood parked in the driveway, its back door open and half unpacked. The screen door creaked as he approached, and before he could knock, Levi burst out holding a crumpled paper bag and dragging a sleeping bag that trailed behind him like a cape. "Mom, I found the trail mix," he yelled, unaware of Neil's presence until he nearly collided with his leg. Levi looked up, blinking. "Oh, hi." Neil smiled and stepped back. "Hey there. You must be Levi." Levi gave a curious look. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," Neil said gently. "But I hope to." Before more could be said, Rachel stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands with a dish towel. Her eyes met Neil's, tired but calm. "They're all in the back. You can come sit on the porch. I'll bring them one at a time." Neil nodded and followed her around to the small wooden deck at the back of the house. A few mismatched patio chairs were set up, and a half-empty jug of lemonade sat on a table beside a stack of comic books. The yard was small but cozy, framed by a chain-link fence and lined with overgrown hedges. It felt lived in, loved, even if a little chaotic. Rachel disappeared inside and returned a minute later with Bryce, who looked a little more serious than the others. He studied Neil with a calm, thoughtful expression that made Neil feel like he was being evaluated by a young detective. "So, you know our mom?" Bryce asked, settling into the chair across from him. Neil nodded, choosing his words carefully. "I do. We used to be very close. I wasn't around when you were born, and I've missed a lot. But I'd like to get to know you, if that's okay." Bryce tilted his head. "You're the guy from the soccer game and the science fair." "Guilty," Neil said with a smile. "I'm not very good at sneaking around." Bryce cracked a small grin. I don't mind. You look kind of like us. Mason says that means something. Neil chuckled softly, his chest tightening with the warmth of that acknowledgement. I think Mason might be onto something. One by one, the boys came out. Mason was curious and cautious, asking questions about Neil's job and his favorite snacks. Ethan was more relaxed now, proud of his science fair ribbon and eager to show Neil a fossil he found at the campground. Levi was wild and full of jokes, constantly moving, constantly testing. By the time all four boys were sitting around him, Neil felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging that reached down to the very bones of who he was. They talked for nearly an hour, Rachel checking in every so often but mostly staying back. Neil told them stories, edited versions, lighthearted and safe, about growing up, about the mistakes he made in college, about the one time he accidentally burned lasagna and set off a fire alarm. The boys laughed and asked questions, and for a brief stretch of time, it was easy. Natural. At one point, Mason leaned forward, squinting at him. So, are you, gonna come back again? Or is this just for today? The question hung in the air like mist. Neil swallowed and looked at each of them, letting the silence stretch just long enough to matter. Only if you want me to. I'd like to. I'd like to be part of your lives, if your mom's okay with it, and if you are too. The boys looked at each other, their silent communication speaking volumes. Then Ethan, ever the spokesperson, gave a short nod. You can come back, but you have to learn how to play Mario Kart. Levi's brutal. Neil laughed, the sound unexpectedly loud in his own ears. Deal, but only if one of you teaches me. As the sun dipped behind the trees and the yard grew colder, Rachel finally stepped out, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Okay, boys, time to start unpacking. Go help in the kitchen. They ran off without much protest, and Neil stood up, rubbing the back of his neck. Thank you, he said softly. Rachel looked at him for a long time. They like you. That matters. But this doesn't mean we're all fixed. I know, Neil replied, but it's a start, and I'll take every minute I can get. She hesitated before nodding. They go to swim practice Wednesday nights. You could come watch. Stay in the back again. He smiled. I'd like that. Rachel turned and walked inside, leaving the door open behind her. Neil stood alone on the porch, the cool evening air brushing past him. It wasn't a miracle, and it wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real. And for the first time in 9 years, it felt like the story of his life was just beginning. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like, and share with friends. Wednesday evening brought with it the kind of soft chill that hinted fall was closer than the calendar admitted. Neil drove toward the Public Aquatic Center in Evanston with his window half down, the air filled with the smell of damp leaves and early dusk. He kept rehearsing what he'd say, how he'd act, how much space to give the boys, how not to overstep. He still didn't know what Rachel truly expected, but she told him where to be and when, and for now, that was enough. He parked away from the main entrance, sitting in his car for a few minutes before heading inside. The place buzzed with the voices of parents and kids, the sharp echoes of coaches' whistles and splashes rebounding off the tiled walls. Neil scanned the pool area until he spotted Rachel sitting alone on the highest bench of the bleachers, legs crossed, her gaze focused on the water. The four boys were already in the pool, goggles on, listening to their instructor shout instructions. He climbed the steps carefully and sat a few feet away from her without saying a word. For a moment, they just watched together, the silence familiar but not unfriendly. Levi was trying to race the others, clearly ignoring the coach, while Mason took everything seriously, perfecting every stroke. Ethan floated easily between focus and fun, and Bryce seemed to be calculating how to win without trying too hard. It amazed Neil how distinct they all were despite being identical in appearance. Watching them now, he could already predict who would challenge him, who would warm up slowly, and who might one day call him dad, without hesitation, or maybe never at all. Rachel finally spoke without turning her head. They were excited you were coming. Mason even laid out his towel for you. He's usually the one who forgets his own name on swim days. Neil chuckled softly. I'm honored. She glanced at him then. I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about all of this. Letting you in after all this time. It's not about punishing you, Neil. It never was. It was just survival. He nodded slowly. I know. I think about it all the time. What I missed. Why I gave up. And what I want now, which, honestly, I don't even fully know yet. I just know I don't want to miss more. She seemed to accept that. There wasn't a dramatic forgiveness. No tearful moment. Just a quiet coexistence, which in their case felt monumental. The practice session continued with drills and a few playful splash wars that the coach tried to control with limited success. Neil found himself smiling at their antics, feeling something shift inside him. When Ethan waved from the pool and shouted, "Hi, Neil," loud enough for everyone in a 10-foot radius to hear, Neil's heart skipped. Rachel let out a laugh and shook her head. Subtle, that one. Yeah, Neil said. I noticed. As practice ended and the boys trotted over with wet hair and proud grins, Neil stood and braced himself for the barrage. Mason handed him a towel, his own, and announced, I saved this for you. Mom says you probably forgot one. Neil took it gratefully, realizing it smelled faintly of chlorine and laundry detergent. And more than anything else, it felt like an invitation. Thanks, he said. You all were great out there. Fast, focused. Levi, you might be part dolphin. Levi puffed up. I told you. I was born to swim, and run, and climb. Bryce rolled his eyes. He got stuck in a tree last weekend. For like 20 minutes. I was testing gravity. Levi shot back. They gathered their gear, and Rachel handed each a snack bar and a juice box from a canvas bag. Neil stood beside her, unsure if he was meant to leave or stay. She glanced at him and then at the boys. We usually get dinner at the burger place on Main. Nothing fancy. They eat like wolves after practice. If you want to come. He didn't hesitate. I'd love to. The burger joint was a low-lit, family-friendly place with booths and endless ketchup bottles. Neil slid into a booth across from the boys, while Rachel took the edge seat, letting the boys banter over who would order what. It felt surreal. The noise, the energy, the way Levi dropped his fries all over the table and Bryce tried to organize the ketchup packets in color-coded rows. It felt like a life he'd watched from the outside for too long. And now, somehow he was inside it. At one point, Mason asked, Why did you stop talking to Mom? Neil froze for a breath, looked to Rachel, who didn't stop him. He looked at his hands, then at the boys. Sometimes people make mistakes. Big ones. I thought I had to choose between chasing success and being a good husband. I thought if I just made enough money, it would fix everything. But by the time I realized I was wrong, too much time had passed. I thought Rachel and the boys would be better off without me. Ethan spoke softly. We didn't know you existed. Neil nodded. That's the hardest part. No one said anything for a moment. Then Bryce offered a small, quiet truth. Well, now we do. Rachel didn't say much the rest of the meal, but her eyes held something different, something cautious but no longer closed. Neil drove home that night thinking of the boys' laughter, the way Levi had insisted on riding in Neil's car and spilled half a milkshake on the seat. He didn't even mind cleaning it up. In fact, he didn't stop smiling the entire time. For the first time in nearly a decade, he wasn't just watching his life go by. He was living it again, messy, loud, chaotic, and he didn't want to let go. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like, and share with friends. Saturday morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor in Rachel's small but warm house in Evanston. The kettle whistled softly, and the scent of cinnamon toast filled the air. Neil stood at the counter, trying to spread peanut butter on toast without tearing the bread, an oddly difficult task when 4 hungry 9-year-olds hovered nearby. Bryce had taken it upon himself to critique every movement, while Levi kept sneakily stealing apple slices from the cutting board. Mason was organizing their Lego pieces by color and shape right on the dining table, and Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, reading aloud from a joke book and laughing at his own punchlines. The house was buzzing with energy, the kind that couldn't be faked or bought. Neil had spent the night on the couch, a decision that felt more natural than uncomfortable. Rachel had offered him a blanket, and he'd accepted it without trying to read too much into the gesture. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was something softer, trust in progress, maybe. Rachel walked in wearing a hoodie and jeans, her hair still damp from a shower. She glanced at the controlled chaos and smiled in that tired but content way all parents seem to master. You survived the morning? Neil grinned. Barely. I've been demoted from toast chief to apple slice refiller. She grabbed a mug from the shelf. That's a high honor in this house. They shared a quiet laugh, then fell into an easy rhythm. Her pouring coffee, him handing out breakfast. The boys sat at the table with mouths full and voices louder than necessary, debating superhero rankings and whether or not ghosts were real. Neil watched them, listened to them, and realized just how much he'd missed. Not just birthdays and school plays. He'd missed the rhythm of mornings, the everyday details, the way Levi dipped his toast in his juice like it was totally normal. After breakfast, Rachel suggested they go to the farmer's market downtown. It was one of those places filled with handmade soap stands, honey jars, fresh vegetables, and people walking dogs that looked like celebrities. The boys each got to pick something small. Bryce chose a hand-painted rock shaped like a turtle. Mason picked a tiny bonsai tree. Ethan fell in love with a mystery novel from a used book stall. And Levi, unsurprisingly, bought a whistle and immediately started blowing it as if training for the Olympics. Neil paid for everything and carried the bags, but it wasn't about money. It was about presence, about showing up, about doing the little things right this time. Rachel noticed, but didn't comment. Her silence was less about distance now and more about observation. She was watching him be the father he hadn't been allowed to be, and maybe she was learning to believe it wasn't temporary. Later in the afternoon, the family settled at the park near Lake Michigan. The boys ran toward the jungle gym, racing and laughing and occasionally shouting to Neil to watch this. Neil sat on a bench beside Rachel, a bottle of water in his hand, his eyes never leaving the kids. A gentle breeze came off the lake, rustling the leaves and carrying the scent of wet grass and hot pretzels from a nearby cart. "You're doing good," Rachel said, out of nowhere. Neil looked at her, surprised. "With them," she added. "They trust you faster than I thought they would." He took a moment to answer. "I don't know what I'm doing half the time, but I know I want to be here. I want to earn back what I lost." She turned to him. "You know, they ask about you when you're not around now, even when they're pretending not to like you. That means something." They sat there quietly, watching their sons climb, fall, laugh, and get back up again. Neil leaned back, soaking in the moment, when suddenly Levi ran over, panting. "Can Neil take us to the movies tonight? Please? There's that robot one." Rachel raised an eyebrow at Neil. "You up for it?" Neil smiled. "You all behaving?" Levi nodded with exaggerated seriousness. "Always. Except when we're not. But mostly yes." The movie was loud and full of action, and the boys were mesmerized, popcorn in hand, eyes wide with excitement. Neil sat with Rachel at the end of the row, and at one point during the climax, Ethan leaned over and whispered, "This is the best day ever." Neil's throat tightened. After the film, Neil drove them home, the car filled with chatter and questions about sequels and robots, and if Bryce could make a comic book version of the story. When they reached the house, Rachel gave each of the boys instructions to get ready for bed. They groaned but listened, dragging their feet up the stairs. Rachel lingered by the doorway as Neil turned to leave. "You know," she said, arms crossed, voice soft, "we have parent-teacher night next Thursday. If you want to come." Neil paused. "I'd like that." "Really?" She nodded. "Then I'll text you the details." And just like that, something subtle had shifted again. An invitation into a more permanent part of their lives. Neil got into his car, started the engine, and sat there for a moment in the dark, feeling like a man who had been let back into his own story. He wasn't trying to fix everything overnight, but he was here, and that was a start. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like, and share with friends. The Thursday evening of parent-teacher night came faster than Neil expected, and with it came a surprising mixture of nerves and excitement. He hadn't been inside the boys' school since before the divorce, before their lives had all been cracked apart and slowly, painfully, rearranged. Rachel had sent him the address and time like she promised, and even included a smiley face emoji, something small but somehow encouraging. Dressed in a navy button-up and jeans, Neil parked outside Dewey Elementary in Evanston just as the sun dipped below the skyline. He saw Rachel already walking across the parking lot, holding a manila folder. She gave him a nod, then waited for him by the front steps. "You came," she said, her tone light but honest. "Of course," Neil replied. "Wouldn't miss it." The school smelled of wax floors and pencil shavings, the kind of scent that never changed no matter how much time passed. Posters lined the walls, drawings of planets, a hallway spelling bee winterboard, and construction paper turkeys wearing sunglasses. Neil and Rachel were handed a map and ushered toward the third-grade classrooms where all 4 boys' teachers were waiting. It quickly became apparent that the boys had made their own distinct reputations. Mrs. Keener, Bryce's teacher, was the first to speak. She was petite with short silver hair and the energy of someone who genuinely liked her job. "Bryce is wonderfully curious, a bit stubborn, but he always wants to understand how things work. He asked me last week why gravity isn't stronger when it rains." Rachel smiled, clearly proud. Neil chuckled. "That sounds like him." Next was Ethan's teacher, Mr. Slade, who had more of a tired but kind energy. Ethan reads more books than anyone in the class. Sometimes he finishes his reading assignment and then asks for an extra. He's also been writing little detective stories. One of them is about a banana thief. Neil laughed out loud. "That's fantastic. He always did like solving mysteries." Levi's teacher, Ms. Molina, was younger and spoke with a no-nonsense tone. "Levi is smart, very smart, but he gets distracted. And when he gets distracted, the whole class tends to follow him. He's got that magnet energy." Rachel raised her eyebrows. "We call him our little tornado." Ms. Molina nodded. "That tracks." Mason's teacher, Mrs. Drury, had the look of someone who'd been doing this for decades, and nothing surprised her anymore. Mason is a builder, always crafting something with paper clips or rubber bands or pipe cleaners. He brings me little machines he invents. They never work, but they're very impressive. Neil beamed. "He builds a home too. I stepped on a paperclip catapult last week." As they moved from classroom to classroom, Neil noticed something he hadn't seen before. Every teacher mentioned both parents. "Bryce talks about you," Mrs. Keener had said. "Ethan said he saw a movie with you," Mr. Slade noted. It wasn't just Rachel doing all the heavy lifting anymore. His presence was becoming part of their narrative. And the more he heard about the boys' quirks, talents, and troublemaking habits, the more he felt connected, not just as a father, but as someone who knew them, really knew them. After the final meeting, Rachel suggested they walk around the schoolyard before heading home. The evening had turned cool, and the playground sat mostly empty except for a few lingering families. They passed the swings where Neil imagined Ethan sitting alone with a book, the monkey bars where Levi had probably attempted a trick he wasn't ready for, and the art wall where Mason might have taped up one of his blueprints. "They're amazing," Neil said. "I mean, I know I'm biased, but really, they're incredible." Rachel looked at him, her arms folded against the chill. "They are, and they're finally getting to know you, the real you." He paused, unsure how far he could take this moment. "I want to keep showing up, not just for meetings and movies. I want to be a real part of this." Rachel didn't answer immediately. She looked up at the darkening sky, then down at the mulch beneath her feet. "It took me a long time to stop being angry, even longer to believe that maybe you'd changed. But seeing you with them, watching them light up around you, it's hard to ignore." They walked in silence for a few seconds. Then Rachel added, "Just don't disappear again. If you say you'll be there, be there." Neil nodded slowly. "I swear, no more vanishing, no more excuses." When they returned to the parking lot, Rachel reached into her folder and pulled out a drawing, handing it to Neil. It was a sketch by Mason, 4 boys holding hands with 2 tall stick figures on either end. One was labeled Mom, the other Dad. Above the picture, in big block letters, it said, "My whole family." Neil's eyes stung. He didn't even try to hide it. Rachel smiled gently and opened her car door. "See you Sunday for the Science Museum?" Neil tucked the drawing carefully into his glove compartment. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like, and share with friends. The weeks following that Thursday evening were a whirlwind for Neil. He had committed himself to being more present, not just for the boys, but for himself as well. At first, it felt like a challenge, showing up at the right moments, making sure he was involved in the things that mattered to them. But the more time he spent with them, the more natural it became. Saturdays were filled with trips to the science museum, walks through the park, and sometimes simple afternoons spent playing video games in their living room. He noticed how each of the boys had their own way of connecting with him, and it warmed him to see how each relationship blossomed in different ways. Bryce, with his endless questions, would bombard him with facts about the solar system or ask about how things worked. Ethan, more reserved, would sometimes slip him a book with a quiet request for his thoughts. Levi, full of energy, would pull him into a game of soccer, his eyes sparkling with mischief and challenge. And Mason, the builder, would present his latest inventions with pride, always eager for Neil to see his creations. Neil had always felt like a spectator in his kids' lives. Now he was slowly, steadily becoming part of it. He began to notice things. The way Ethan would tap his foot when he was nervous, how Bryce's eyes would light up whenever a new project caught his attention, how Levi would try to make others laugh, even if it meant making himself the joke. And Mason, always building, always creating, seemed to pull Neil into his world of imagination. It was incredible to be there, to witness it firsthand. He was more than just a visitor now. He was a part of their daily rhythm. It wasn't just the kids who had begun to see a change in Neil. Rachel had, too. Their conversations were less strained, less filled with resentment. There was a new understanding between them. They had, in a way, found a new form of partnership, one that didn't require them to be together in the traditional sense, but allowed them to co-parent with respect and openness. One evening, after they had taken the boys to a local basketball game, Rachel turned to him as they stood by the car, waiting for the boys to finish their post-game snacks. "You're doing well, Neil," she said quietly, almost as if she was surprised by her own words. Neil looked at her, taken aback. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've been showing up. And not just for them, but for yourself. You're actually present." Neil nodded, feeling a warmth spread through him. "It's hard to believe how much I missed when I wasn't around. It's different now. It feels like it should have been this way all along." Rachel smiled, a rare moment of softness in her usually guarded demeanor. "Yeah, maybe. But at least you're here now. And that counts." The weeks continued to pass with moments like this, small, quiet acknowledgments that they were making progress. Neil knew the road to truly mending everything would take time, but for the first time in years, he felt like they were moving in the right direction. The boys continued to thrive, their personalities blossoming, and Neil was there for all of it. Then came a school play. It was something the boys had been preparing for weeks, and they were all excited, especially Levi, who had landed a small speaking part. The night of the performance, the school gymnasium was packed with families. Neil found Rachel near the front row, holding camera. She smiled at him as he approached. "You made it," she said, her voice carrying a hint of surprise, but also a touch of pride. "I wouldn't miss it," Neil replied, settling in next to her. The lights dimmed, and the stage lit up with the school's second-grade cast. The play was about a group of animals who learned the value of teamwork, and all 4 boys were involved. It wasn't until Levi took the stage that Neil's heart swelled. His son, full of energy and spirit, delivered his lines with more confidence than Neil had ever seen from him. When Levi finished his scene, he ran off stage, his face flushed with excitement. He found Neil in the crowd and waved, a grin plastered across his face. Neil waved back, his chest tight with emotion. When the play ended and the curtain closed, the boys rushed to meet him. Levi jumped into his arms, and Bryce immediately started asking about the next play. Ethan was a little more subdued, but seemed to glow with quiet pride. Mason was last, his face thoughtful. "Did you see the part where I built the treehouse on the set?" he asked, his voice full of excitement. "I did, buddy. It was great," Neil replied. The drive home that night was quiet, save for the sounds of the boys discussing the play. Rachel and Neil exchanged a glance, something unsaid between them, but understood. It was moments like this, Neil thought, that made everything worth it. The years of mistakes, the time apart, it was all leading to this. As they pulled up to their house, the boys scrambled out of the car, racing toward the door. Neil lingered for a moment, his eyes on them, and then turned to Rachel. "I'm glad we're doing this," he said, his voice low. "Me too," she replied, her smile soft. For the first time in a long while, Neil felt like he had his life in his hands again. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was real. And that, Neil thought, was enough.